computer. Okay, so a recording is now in progress.
Mm.
Okay. All right. Good evening and welcome to this month's NYRSF readings. My name is Barbara Krasnoff, and I will be hosting this evening's event where I'm pleased and honored to talk with Nnedi Okorafor. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Okorafor.
Okorafor, I apologize. I
Oh, no
practiced
problem.
last month and Okorafor, one of the genre's most talented and celebrated authors. Before I welcome Nnedi, I'd like to add that this event is being produced by Jim Freund as part of the NYRSF Reading series. The NYRSF Readings is a monthly virtual event, and we will be back hopefully next month with a new author to be announced. So keep an eye on our Facebook group for further announcements. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest. Nnedi's works includes Who Fears Death, in development at HBO into a TV series, the Binti novella trilogy, optioned and in development with Media Res, the Book of Phoenix, the
Incivity.
Insipidity script series. I should have gone over this with you beforehand. I apologize. And Lagoon. She is the winner of the Hugo, Nebula, World Fantasy, Locust, and Lodestar Awards. And her debut novel, Zara the Windseeker, won the prestigious Wool-Soyinka Prize for Literature. Nnedi has also written an African futurist comic series, LaGuardia, winner of the Hugo and Eisner Award, comics for Marvel, including Black Panther, Long Live the King, and Wakanda Forever, and the Shuri series, and her short memoir, Broken Places in Outer Spaces. Nnedi holds a PhD in literature and two MAs in journalism and literature. She lives with her daughter and family in Phoenix, Arizona. And welcome, and thank you for coming and putting up with us. Um,
Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
you have had an amazing career, starting with the experiences you describe in your memoir, Broken Places in Outer Spaces, which, by the way, is a incredible memoir.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and about your background?
Yeah. Well, Broken Places and Outer Spaces, the story of how I became a
Okay, I'm sorry. You stopped. Um,
and 19.
I'm
And
sorry, and Nnedi, we crashed. So I'm sorry, could you start again?
okay. Is it working or like
It is now working.
okay. Okay. Where was I? What was I saying? It was a broken
You were
place.
talking about your memoir.
Yeah, okay. So if I'm asked about my background, Broken Places and Outer Spaces is a great place to start with that. So that's a book that that's a I want to say book, but like it was much longer. What I wrote was the size of a novel. Like it was long. And so that's a very compressed version of everything, but it's published by TED Books. And the book is about, it focuses on this specific time of my life which is really the origin of how I became a writer, and really until all of that happened, I was not going in that direction at all. I was very much into athletics. I played semi-pro tennis from the age of 9 to 19. And then I also was a track star. I did the 400, the 800, the long jump, the high jump. Um, and all that changed when I was 19. And I'm just trying to, the whole story is in the memoir. That's why I wrote it. But let me see if I could just say this quickly. When I was 13, I was diagnosed with scoliosis, which is very common. Lots of people have scoliosis. It's the curvature of the spine. Mine was very, very aggressive. And even though I was doing all of these sports, I my curvature progressed, and I wore a back brace and everything, did the exercises, everything, nothing stopped it. And for me, it was partially genetics because my siblings had scoliosis, but theirs stabilized early. Mine just kept going, but also my tennis game might have definitely influenced, actually definitely influenced the severity, because my tennis game was dominated by one side of my body. I had a killer forehand and I could hit 114-mile-per-hour serve. So that's one side. And I was fast enough to run around my forehand, all of that. So they think that contributed to the severity of it. So by the time I was 19, I was a freshman at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana-Champaign. I always want to say Champaign-Urbana. And they did an x-ray, and my doctor said that if I didn't have this surgery to straighten it out, if we didn't handle this now, then my life would be significantly shortened, because my organs, my spine was like in an S, and it was slowly just compressing all of my organs. And so not only would my life would be significantly shortened, I would be basically incapacitated. And so it was clear that I had to have the surgery. Went in, had the surgery that May 18th, woke up May 19th, 9 hours later, paralyzed from the waist down. They did not know if I would ever walk again. They did not know why. And so there's a 1% chance that everyone, because when you're dealing with the spine, this is always a risk. And it was a 1% chance, which when I look back, that's kind of high. That's kind of, but yeah, so I was in that 1% of people who respond to this surgery in this way, this mysterious way with paralysis. So I was a paralyzed athlete. That is a very extreme position. Someone who's very used to moving easily through the world, runs the fastest, jumps the highest, can do back bends, flips, all kinds of things. And then suddenly they're paralyzed from the waist down, like half of your body has disappeared. And so for me, this was extremely jarring. It's the kind of thing that would break someone's mind. And so like for me in the first few days, I was kind of losing it. I was really losing it, especially after they took me off of the morphine, which was distracting me with hallucinations. And the hallucinations slowly wore off. And I came to understand what my situation was, and I was losing my mind in those first few days. And the only way, like, I knew I had to do something, and the only thing I could think of was picking up this book. It was I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, and I was in too much pain to read it. I just started writing this story. Like, I had never written a story before. I'd never written anything creatively before. I'd never been asked to write anything creatively. I come from parents who are doctors. We don't think in that direction. The sciences were what I was most interested in. I loved bugs. My father was teaching me about the heart and the way the heart works, because he's a heart surgeon, all of that. And so I had this moment where in my mind, I read a lot of stories. So I think that was the path. I loved books. I loved reading any kind of story that could catch my attention. So intuitively, I understood the mechanics of a story. And so I picked up once I picked up that book, and I just started writing making up the story. And the story that I made up was about a woman who could fly. And she was Nigerian. She was in from the pre-colonial times. And, when I look back, when you can fly, you don't have to walk. It's clear why my mind would go in that direction. I made something up. That was the first time, that was my moment of discovering storytelling. And so that was that pivotal thing where something just clicked. And it was instant. The moment I did that, it was like falling in love immediately, like deeply, solidly, forever kind of love. And I haven't stopped writing since. And so, like, to make a long story short, through my family put me in physical therapy, even though there was nothing happening with my legs, nothing. They put me in physical therapy. So I'm just trying to do these things when nothing's there. And it kind of worked, because slowly the sensation started returning. I used my knowledge of training to like get back to work and suffer and go through all the difficulties. And I had to literally learn how to walk. It was very difficult. It was scary and terrifying at many times. So I went from a wheelchair to a walker to a half walker to a cane over that summer, returned to the University of Illinois using a cane, but also writing stories, because I never stopped. From that moment I started writing stories. I never stopped.
Wow.
And And the rest is history. That's how I started writing in that hospital bed that day. Yeah.
Well, from there to your latest publication, which is She Who Knows, which is a trilogy, and
Mm-hmm.
is described on your website as a prequel and sequel to Who Fears Death. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so She Who Knows it's part science fiction, part fantasy, what it's African, whatever. It's I like these categories are just getting in my way lately. I'm just yeah. It's set in the future. It's got it's very much about it's infused with modern day mysticism, cosmology, spiritual African mysticism, cosmology, spirituality, all those things. And it's a novella. And it's centered on our main character, Najiba. Najiba is the mother of Onesonwu, who's the main character of Who Fears Death.
Mm-hmm.
Onesonwu, if you translate her name, it means who fears death in
Fears Death.
Igbo. And then Najiba, you translate her name, it means she who knows. So both of these narratives are about characters. So She Who Knows is about Najiba. The first book is called Fire Spitter, and it's about Najiba before all the events of Who Fears Death. It's when she's in her teens. And what you learn about who she is that there's been a lot going on with this girl well before everything happened with Who Fears Death. So that part is the prequel. It's a novella trilogy, and I knew for once, unlike with Binti, for once I knew this was one, and I think I could recognize it because of writing Binti. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I wrote Binti, I didn't know what it like. I did not know that it was going to be a trilogy. I just knew there was a lot of story there. I wanted to write it. I didn't know when I'd write it. I didn't know. When I look back with the knowledge that I have now, when I look back, yeah, I would have known that Binti was a trilogy. Like just knowing the shape of the story and the character and the depth of that world. Oh yeah, that's definitely a trilogy. But now with She Who Knows, I'm able to recognize it. I recognized it immediately because when I first started writing She Who Knows, Fire Spitter, when she's in her teens, I thought I was writing a novel. I was sure of it. And then I got to the end. And when I'm writing, I don't write to length. I write it till it's done. And suddenly, so I'm thinking I'm writing a novel, then I get to the end and it's like a novella length. And I looked at it and I'm like, and I knew what the rest of the story was. I knew it. And I'm like, the rest of the story is not, it's a different book. And I remember stopping and like, oh my God, I did this again. I did it. It's happening again. And so I knew that it was the first one's going to be this novella that's about her younger life. And then the second is when Najiba is in her 40s and it's after Who Fears Death. So it's a sequel. So this trilogy is going to be a prequel sequel. The first one is the prequel, and then this by labels. And then the second one and the third are both when she's in her 40s
Yeah.
after Year's death. So that's a sequel. Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we lead from that into your reading? What are you going to read for us?
I'm gonna read the author's note and then the first little section of She Who Knows. So it's really
Okay.
very much a beginning in many ways. And I'm probably gonna repeat a few things that I've already said, but that's good. Okay. All right. Author's note. I've wanted to write Najiba's story for years. Who Fears Death was originally two novels, a book one and a book two, and I wrote about Najiba in the first. Most of her parts of the story never made it into the published singular novel. However, those kernels of story stayed with me, and they were so strong that over the years I found myself speaking about Najiba as if I'd already told her story. To understand this novella, there are some things you need to know. Najiba's amazing and intense daughter, Onisonwu, did something big. The world has changed, realigned. Najiba helped her daughter accomplish that feat. And if you want to know the story of how that happened, you'll find it in Who Fears Death, a novel named after its titular character, Onye Her name literally means the question, who fears death? However, Those natural abilities Najiba used to help her daughter Onisoma were not new. They had their own origin long before Onisoma was born, and this novel is that story. This novella is that story. Other things to know. Okeke people are people of African descent. The Nuru people are of Arab descent. The Earth of this story is our distant future Earth. So there will be some things you recognize blended with things that you don't. There are always consequences, results, fruitions, and descendants, just as there are ancestors. If you need a precise longitude and latitude, go with 12.8628 degrees north and 30.2176 degrees east. Salt, dust, wind, and a powerful will. This is Najiba's tale. Sincerely me. She who knows. So it starts off with a quote by Haruki Murakami from Kafka on the Shore. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. Chapter 1. Who sees a spirit and lives? If I stood there long enough, I was sure I'd see one of the old ones dancing in the distance. That's how hot it was that day. I brought my portable from my pocket and looked at it. At the top of the screen, it announced it was the hottest day of the year. Then it decided to shut itself down for the next few hours to keep from overheating. It was dusk, yet still boiling hot outside. Not unusual, but a little disturbing nonetheless. A thin shower of rain began to fall, and a large brown bird squawked and then took to the air from the neighbor's roof across the road. The desert is strange. I was standing there because this was the moment, the beginning. I shut my eyes and took a deep breath, inhaling it all, the fact of it all, through my mouth to my lungs to the rest of my body. I'd just come from my brother's house, where I'd spent some hours with their new baby, who was so fat and cute and happy. I'd been thinking about what it would be like for me in a few years. Now I wasn't thinking about any of that at all. My mind was full of a new knowledge. I turned around, opened the door, and went inside to find my parents. I was 13 years old, and I was a girl. Yet I was sure, absolutely positive. I opened my eyes and paused, rubbing my forehead. I can't believe this, I whispered. I went inside and found my mother in the kitchen where she usually was at this time of the day. Fry those yams, Najiba, she said, her back to me. The round slices were on the cutting board, and the deep pan of oil on the stove was just starting to heat up. On the other burner was another large pan of sizzling chopped tomatoes, olive oil, smoked aku, sauteed onions, curry, smoked mushrooms, and chili peppers. On the counter behind her, sitting in its own sunbeam on its royal blue ornate plate, with the gold flecks embedded in its into the shiny porcelain, was a large cube of salt. The bowl of several stirred eggs was on the counter beside the stove. Mama was making egg stew. I joined her, my heart pounding hard. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask. Then my father entered the kitchen grinning. He put his arm around my mother. Papa, I want to go this year, too, I blurted. My parents stared at me, and then my mother turned and looked at Papa. You've told our daughter before me, she asked. No, he said, looking questioningly at me. I haven't told anyone. I was about to tell you right now. Mama looked hard at me with her near black piercing eyes. What does it feel like? She asked me. I thought for a moment. I'd never asked Papa, so I had no context to draw from. I said the first thing that came to mind, like the wind is blowing me towards the door. My mother's eyes grew wide, and she looked at Papa, who also looked shocked. Then she grinned. I've given birth to 3 boys, not 2. Apparently so, Papa agreed. Mama hugged me tightly, kissed my cheek, and then she shoved me back towards the now sizzling yams. But I noticed her eyes had grown wet. She loved her solitude, but she didn't want me to go. She stepped to the cube of salt and picked it up. Salt is life, the three of us softly recited as she grated some into the bowl of eggs. My father and I held out our hands and my mother grated some salt onto them. We rubbed over our heads together. We rubbed our hands together and then pressed them to our chests. Salt has always been important to humanity, yes. Even here in Jawir, it's worth more than most things. But back in my village, salt was sacred to my people. It was life, but also culture, self-worth, our purpose for existing. My mother poured the eggs into the sizzling vegetables and began to slowly turn it. Papa sat at the table, looking hard at me as he continued to rub his hands. You're sure? Yes, Papa, I said. It's a week there, a week to the market, and a week back. I know, Papa. The way is not easy. I know, Papa. The Okeke at the market are camel shit people, Mama added. They see us as abominations, even if you're kind. Doesn't matter that they are all Okeke people like us. It is the plight of being a Sonu. I know, Papa. I know, Mama, I said. You'll still have to be kind, but strong. I nodded. Yes, Mama. Is your Abdul strong enough? Papa asked. Abdul was my camel. I will make him so, I said. I turned to look at the frying yams as Mama looked to my father and my father to my mother, and they did that silent thing they always did. My parents could have a whole complicated conversation without opening their mouths. My oldest brother, Rayan, said that they spoke through their eyes, but it was more than that. When they talk like this, I always wanted to leave because it just made me feel so not there. Like they'd already shoved me out of the room and shut the door, and my body just had to catch up with my spirit. But I stayed where I was, letting the yams brown and then flipping them over. I carefully took them out, stacked them onto the cloth-covered plate. Mama gave the egg stew a few more turns and ladled it onto the large bowl. The stew was fluffy and hot, and I had no doubt that it was tasty. With the yams, it was the perfect meal. Who will maintain our vegetable garden while you're away, Najiba? My mother asked, preparing a plate of stew and yams for my father. You will, Mama, I said. No, she said, smirking. I'll pay someone to do it. The three of us laughed. Of course she would. I'll stop there. Whew.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get the view back. There we go. That was great. I love the idea of salt is life. Um, and that's in a lot of cultures.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you think about blood and sweat and just the body, it's and where salt comes from, and it's like something that comes from the earth. It's essential. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that it's significant in all cultures.
Now, Who Fears Death is in development at HBO into a TV series, which I know a lot of people are very excited about. Um,
Mhm.
how much input will you have into the scripts?
Um, that's a hard conversation. But yeah, I'm involved.
Yeah.
I've been involved, and it's that has its consequences. We'll just put it that way. I have several things that are in development, and with all of them, I have learned, especially with I've had several things, and with each one, I learn more and more where I need to be involved and why it's important. And so it's one thing that I've learned is that with the types of stories that I'm writing, it's essential that I be involved. I don't have the
Mm,
op I don't have the privilege to be able to sit back and let these things be developed and have any possibility of what gets developed being even remotely similar or understood by the creators if I'm not involved. I mean,
right.
that's there's a cat. Okay.
Well,
Keep going.
hello, Kat.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I mean, it's really important for me to be involved
Yeah.
in my projects. Yeah.
Well, that's really encouraging from all of us who have read the book and are hoping for the best. Um, how do you approach writing for young people as opposed to writing for adults?
Yeah, I mean, so I've written for adults, young adults, middle grade, and children. So I've done like the whole gambit. And I would say that children's writing is its own thing. It's picture books. It's very different the way that you go about it. But middle grade, young adult, adults, they all come from the same place for me. Like it comes from the same source. I think that the difference, if there is a difference, especially between, I guess, middle grade and young adult and adult, the main difference, it's not that like I tend to go full on with young adult and adult. Like if there's darkness,
Hmm.
it's in there. I'm not going to hold back. Middle grade, I've only written like I've written I think two middle grade books. It's a place that I'm still testing. But with young adults, I'm not going to hold back at all.
Yeah.
The only difference I think between young adult and adult is I feel more of a responsibility to not explain, but like if something really tough or difficult is happening, I feel more responsibility with it.
Mm,
Like I don't feel like I can just throw my readers in without anything. And I'll throw the readers in with my adult work, which is why when people label Who Fears Death as young adult, I'm like, no, it's not. That's not young adult at all. I wrote that I didn't hold anything back in any of those scenes. It's not even about for me, it's not about the age of the character. I've read plenty of stories where the age that it's about a young child and it's an adult book. So it's not only about the age of the character, it's about more than that. So if I'm writing something that's for young adults, it's I'm going to have those heavy things in there, but I'll feel more of a responsibility with it. And that could mean like I can't define exactly what I mean by that, but I know what I mean by that.
yeah.
With an adult novel, I'll just go right in and there's I'm like you'll be all right. And if you're not, well,
Well, to sort of turn that a little bit on its head, you're telling Najeeba's story at different ages.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that, how do you deal with that? How do you change somebody at so different parts of their life?
Yeah, I mean, I know the character really well. I've known this character, like I've been writing her for so long, and I have been turning her story around in my head for many years. So there's already that. And then, I mean, like, so Fire Spitter, that's when she's in her teens, and she's different then, and like, I mean, I can remember what it's like to be a 13-year-old. It's not like I've never been that and I just can't imagine it. I can remember that and I draw and that 13-year-old still lives in me, so
Hmm.
I just draw from that. And so like the voice of it is because it's still Najiba. Like and I've written the second book and I've just finished the very ugly, messy draft of the third. So I know the whole story. I know the whole arc of her narrative. And of course, she changes, and of course, her voice is like this when she's a kid, and because in Fire Spitter, she's a kid, and then her voice in the second book, which is called One Way Witch, oh, she's very different. She's very different, but it's still her. So it's like, I mean, how do I do that? I don't know. I mean, that's that mysterious part of storytelling and creativity that I have the ability to tap into. And my characters do speak to me. And, I hear their voices. So it's like, I don't know. How do I do it? I don't know. I do it though.
You've also written comics. How is that process different?
Oh, it's very different, but like it's still the same source in terms of storytelling. Like the story comes from the same source, but comics are they're collaborative. That's the biggest difference is being collaborative, but also the form. Because like I am one who does not outline. I'm a pantser. I don't write linearly. I'm all over the place. I just bleh. With comics, you can't do that, which was part of like I like a good challenge, and that was part of why I was like, oh, let's see how this goes. Let me try this. This is different because with comics, you know how long it's supposed to be from the beginning. From the beginning of the project, you know how long it's supposed to be. You've got this many pages. And then also you have to write an outline for what if you're doing, if you're doing issues, if it's like comic books, you write an outline. If it's a graphic novel, you write the script for the whole thing. But with comic books, which I've done the Marvel stuff, you do an outline of that comic first. And so like I said, I don't outline. So I had to learn how to outline, so it's very different. And then there's a collaborative aspect to it where you're working with so many super talented people with different skill sets than yours. They bring things that you don't have to the project, which is really cool. So you've got the illustrator, the colorer, the letterer, you've got your editor, you've got like just so many, and in each of those areas, there are additional layers of story. So like when I write, I'll write I tend to write very detailed scripts. And, like with each panel, you'll note, like I will write what's in each panel where everything is. That's just me. And I've, with this is a different thing with Space Cat, but, so you've already got that. And then and then I know who the illustrator is and I know what their strengths are and then try to write to their strengths. So if they like a lot of detail, if they like to write, if they like to draw a lot of plants or whatever, I try to write to that. And then a lot of times the illustrators will come up with cool things too that I'd never thought of. And then the letterers come up with cool things. It's just crazy. But like, yeah, like I think it's great for me as a writer who's used to just as a novelist who's used to being the god of that that story. Nice to let go and collaborate and then see these things that come into being that never would have been there if I weren't working with a whole bunch of people. It's very cool.
It does sound cool, but now I'm going to ask a difficult and probably unanswerable question. What format do you like best?
All of it. I mean, I think at the heart, I like long form prose, like because that's where I like novella seems to be the novella length seems to be a place that I excel in. That's a recent discovery of mine. I feel like it's recent. It's something that it's one of those things where a lot of times you find out what you're good at. It's not necessarily the thing that you were drawn to in the first place.
Hmm.
It's from experience. You're trying different things and then you realize, oh, I'm good at that. So like I'm good at the novella length. I like an economy of words. I'd like
Hmm.
see how much I can get into a story in an economic way. I like that. That's probably from the journalism side of me. But I also like novels. I like long stretched out stories. But so that said, all the forms from film, screenwriting to comics to prose, long and short form to theater, all those I've done all of those, and even memoir and nonfiction. I've been a journalist before, so I've done all of those different types of writing, and even with journalism, there is an aspect of storytelling in there. I'm not talking about making up lies. That is not journalism. But Yeah, there is an aspect of storytelling in there. Narrative is a good way of conveying information. So there's that. And every single one there's something that's really that they do the best. There's something amazing about all of them. And so because I've done all of them, I like to take from them and use them in different things. So there are things about novel writing that I will take into screenwriting. There are things about writing comics that I bring right into my prose. There are things about film that I definitely bring into my novel writing. There are things that I've learned about screenplays, the 3-act structure, all of that I'll bring with me, that I'll bring into my novellas, So it's I saying that one is which one do I prefer most? I mean, I take from all of them. And then I
Mm.
use whatever I need to use to tell the story that I am telling at that time.
Okay. All right. Let's go back in 2019. You wrote a short essay on your blog in which you defined and discussed the term Afrofuturism. You knew
African.
this was, I'm sorry, go ahead.
African futurism.
African futurism. I apologize. You knew this was going to come up.
Yeah.
How did that essay develop itself? How did what brought it up?
It came up when for a while, for some years, I tried embracing the term Afrofuturism. It was a
Hmm.
term that was getting slapped on my work. A lot of labels get slapped on my work kind of retroactively. And so I'm hearing this term. I see where it's from. It's being used very, very liberally. It's basically being used for everything, all Black speculative fiction, and then some. It's
Yeah.
just everything. And I'm just like, okay, all right. So I'm going to try to use this term. It sounds like a cool term. I'm going to try to use it. And then, and in my head, I saw the original definition, but I was like, okay, I guess we're opening it up because the original definition positioned it as African American. African American, what is it? Speculative fiction. I don't know. But Africa specifically when we were talking about geographic origins and cultural origins, African American. So I'm just like, okay, I guess we're opening it up because for me, I'm Nigerian American, and the reason why I say that is my parents came here in 1969. That's how I was born here. I'm not the direct descendant of those Africans that were dragged here and built this country. So there's that. I thought they were opening it up. I tried to embrace the term, and that's why I use the term in my TED Talk, Afrofuturism. And then in 2018, when the Black Panther movie came out, that's where something was brought to my attention. It was very clearly brought to my attention that I was not considered, like Afrofuturism wasn't for me. That was what was said to me thousands of times, particularly on Twitter. I remember that. And so that was a really emotional time for me because like I understood where that feeling came from. It was like a sort of a territorialness happening because Black Panther was doing so well and a group of people wanted to kind of like, this is our territory. So they were kicking out all those of us who were not quite in that group. And you know, it was problematic. It was really problematic. And so I was just like, okay, well, if I'm not one I don't like to try to be somewhere where I am not wanted. That is, I don't need that. So I said, all right, so if I'm not this, then this is what I'm doing. And so that was really the origin of me defining African futurism. And I wrote this essay to really kind of highlight it because, I'm not like my the way that I started writing science fiction and imagining the future um it comes from Nigeria. It always has. Like literally, it did not come from reading classic science fiction books that came before. Didn't come from that. I wasn't reading much of it. It was going to Nigeria to visit family. So there's always a familial direct connection. going there to visit family, being in the village, and seeing, in particular, technology showing up, in particular, cell phones. And once I saw cell phones showing up in these parts of in the village, so it wasn't even Lagos, which is the big city. It was in the southeast Igbo land, in my parents' ancestral villages, where we would visit there every time we would go. That like half of our trip would be over there. And I started seeing cell phones show up in these places that seemed, to my American eye, very rural, even though I understand they were farmland, seemed very rural. You've got these houses that are not, that are beautiful. Like you have people who have who have left Nigeria and made their fortune out in the diaspora, and then they come back and build a big mansion in the village, but there's no electricity or running water because there's no infrastructure. So I was used to going to these places growing up since I was 7 years old. And then when cell phones started showing up in those places, that piqued my curiosity in this bizarre, because I'm just seeing them like in the most, you see these traditional situations, and then you see someone carrying a supercomputer, a portable supercomputer that links them all over the world. It was just brilliant and amazing, and it just got my imagination going. At that point, I was writing mainly whatever you want to call it, fantasy, fiction that was inspired by Nigerian, in particular, Igbo cosmology and spiritual beliefs and all of that. So that there was already that going on. But then I started seeing this happening, and I'm like, what is this place going to be like in the future? Because you've just like you jumped over the infrastructure issue, and then you have the supercomputer there. It's like going to be different than other parts of the world, and it's going to be very specific. So I was like, well, who's writing about this? I looked around, didn't see anyone writing about it. And I wanted to see it written about from people who are from there, not from outsiders coming in. Couldn't find any narratives that were written from that point of view. And that's why I started writing it, because I wanted to read it. And so that's what led me to writing this kind of thing. So when you put the label of Afrofuturism, which is mainly about speculative fiction that's coming from an African American point of view, it doesn't fit with what I was doing and what I was writing from. It just doesn't fit. Even though I am American, it doesn't fit. So these are things that had been on my mind already, and I had been trying to explain them. Nobody was listening. Nobody was understanding. Nobody was understanding that there are different cultural aspects and angles and points of views within Black speculative fiction. It was not being like, it was like mainly being said that there's a small part that's most of Black speculative fiction is African American, and then everyone else is kind of on the side and not sensible. And I had a problem with that being Nigerian American, where I'm both here and there, and it's like all mixed up. I'm like, that's not, you're excluding a lot. And also, why exclude? Why does there have to be a center? These are conversations. I wanted those conversations to be had, and they weren't being had. So I wrote this essay about where I coined this term African futurism, and my main goal was to start a conversation. In no way am I trying to just be like, this is what it is, and there's no other way around, like there's no nuance, whatever about it. I wanted to start a conversation, and it started a conversation. So yay.
And how has the conversation been going?
There's been a lot of people get upset. People have accused me of being divisive. A lot of, and it's interesting because it comes from the conversation. Like I remember being in, there's a festival, literary festival that I love going to, and I'm going again this year, called the Ake Festival, which takes place in Nigeria. And it's typically in Lagos or Abeokuta, but lately it's been in Lagos. And it was there where, the subject of Afrofuturism came up. And let me tell you, the point of view that you heard over there would be very different from the point of view that you would hear in the United States. There's a whole other conversation going on. There's a lot of pushback of the term. A lot of African writers don't want to be called that, and they'll say why, or the ones that do are just trying to get by because it's so hard to be on the outside of things. So it's a lot of that going on. And so I'm privy to the conversation. So like where here, there's some people get upset on both sides. Some people don't even like me speaking on it. They're like, you're not even African. So like, who are you to even speak on this? And then on the other side, they're just like, you're being divisive and you think you're better than us African American. And it's just crazy. But it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
I just like that there is conversation happening. I'm okay with taking some of the taking a few punches. I'm fine with it as long as there's a conversation happening. So that's, and when I look at it as a whole, it's all good. It's all good.
I understand you now have a book-length scholarly treatment of your fiction,
Yeah.
called Magic, Myth, Morality of the Future by Sandra Lindau.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yep. Yep. I have not read it. I could not, even if I wanted to. Even seeing it, I like started sweating. Started sweating. I'm like, oh, because I know how knowledgeable scholars are and how thorough they are. They're very well researched. And I mean, but like what an honor. What an honor that a scholar sat down with all of my strange stories and just kind of went in hard enough to write a whole book. I truly, I mean, it's an honor, but it's also absolutely terrifying.
So what are you working on now? What's happening with you now?
Right now, well, I've got so She Who Knows, the first book, Fire Spitter, came out in August of like August 20th. And then so I have a bunch of stuff that are so okay, in terms of what I'm working on now. Yeah, so She Who Knows, the first one that came out in August, and I'm editing the second book now, which is called One Way Witch. And as I said before, I recently finished a very ugly, messy draft of the third book, which I don't know the title of that one yet. So that's one that I'm working on. I also have a new novel coming out in January. Oh, that's a big one. And it's called Death of the Author. And this is easily, even though Who Fears Death is just below it, the most personal novel that I've ever written. It has a lot of it's beyond genre. There are literary aspects. It's a literary um novel about it's a Nigerian American family saga, and that it's loosely and very strongly based on my family. And so that's most of the story, not most of the story, but that's part of it. And then it's also a post-human robot fable. Like also a post-human robot fable. I mean, it's about a woman named Zelu who and she's paraplegic and she's Nigerian American. She comes from this big Nigerian American family, and she's an adjunct professor and a writer. And the story starts off with her being she's at the wedding of her sister, her younger sister, and she's during this wedding, which is very cultural. It's very it's Nigerian family, and then her sister's marrying a South African guy, and he's Zulu, and they're very proud, all proud of their cultures. And then it's in Trinidad. So she's at this wedding, and while she's at this wedding, she gets fired from her job as her adjuncting position for being a little too honest with one of her students. And then and then also she gets another rejection of her novel, like her literary novel that's been getting kicked around. So her novel gets rejected, she gets fired from her job, her life's crap. And then at the end of this wedding night, she's just yeah, and she smokes weed too. So she smokes some weed, and she's just going into her mind and all of that, and she's just feeling sad and pathetic, and she starts writing this book. And this book is unlike anything she's ever written because it's not literary, it's not about characters who are all thinking internal thoughts with no plot, that kind of story. It's a book about robots. It's a book about robots after human beings have died off and they're going to war. So she's writing this, and it's called Rusted Robots. And yeah, it's called Rusted Robots. And so the plot takes off when she shows this to her agent, and it just blows up. The book blows up. Throughout the story, braided into the narrative is our actual chapters of Rusted Robots. And then I'll just leave it at that. It's more than
Oh,
it's a lot. It's a lot. So that's coming out in January, and I'm really excited about that one because it's so personal. Like, it's the only way I can put it. It's so personal.
oh, it sounds absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Nnedi, for talking to us and reading for us. And I can't wait until that book comes out in January. But then when is the second book?
So She Who Knows, the second book, She Who Knows One Way which that comes out in I think the spring of 2025. And
Okay.
then I also have a graphic novel called The Space Cat coming out in the summer of 2025. So it's like next year is going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot.
And hopefully we'll be talking to you about them.
Yes.
Um, Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who is watching this on YouTube and listening to this on Hour of the Wolf. And we will be back with next month's NYRSF readings. This was produced by Jim Freund, and I am Barbara Krasnoff. And I appreciate this chance. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. This has been great.
Okay.